Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the process of skin weight painting inside of Maya. I've got here prepared my file where I've got my character. Currently what you're looking at is my avatar. So let's kind of go through this a little bit before we get started. My character exists in two costumes. So what I've got here geometrically is, we'll go and hide her joints so you can see this. So what I've got here is some layers consisting of both her costumes. These are the two costumes that she's going to wear in the project that I'm doing. So here is costume 2, which is the character's civilian costume. We've been putting this together over the series of videos that I've been doing, and then underneath this is her. This is the traditional Star Trek costume, the little single short red dress that she's wearing with the big knee-high boots. So these are the two costumes that I've done. And then below that, in the bottom layer, is my shared geometry. So these are the elements, the bits and pieces of the costume that are shared between the two costumes. In this case, that's only just her hands and her head and eyes. Okay, so just the commonalities here between the two costumes. The next thing that I've done is I've gone and brought in my avatar. So the avatar was the base mesh that I used when we did our anatomical sculpting that I used to create this character. Now this has been shifted and moved a little bit, and that's because I've done things while creating her here. Like the fact that her boots have her, up off the ground, and that her feet kind of dip down into the bottom of the shoe here. The avatar itself doesn't actually have that. Her feet are just kind of standing flat on the ground. So in order to make everything else line up where it's supposed to, I've gone and shifted the avatar up a little bit. And you'll see that when I go and bring the common elements of her costume back in here and I bring the avatar back on, you'll see that these pretty closely line up too. I'm not really worried about them being one-to-one. I just kind of want them to be close enough that what I'm about to do is going to work. Now, because of the complexities of her costume, because of the amounts of pieces and the blending between them, where you have her this sash that goes around the back of her neck, it's then under her belt and then flows in front of her pants. In order to weight paint all of this stuff accurately, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be weight painting something a little bit simpler, and that is an avatar, this avatar that I used. So this one is going to be fairly simple to weight paint because there's no complexities here. I don't have to worry about belt buckles or shoelaces or, any of those things that would make weight painting a little bit more complex. And then what I can do once I've simplified down the model to weight paint something like this, I can then transfer that weighting information to the other geometry. So that means that I'll be able to work with something simpler, give myself an easier time, and then transfer that data to something a little bit harder. Now, it's not going to be a simple one-to-one. We're not just going to be transferring the weight data and calling it a day because of things like the flowy bits of costume and the skirt and things that are not present in the naked model. There's obviously some additional weight painting that's going to need to be done once we get to the point of the transfer. So that's kind of an important thing to realize. Now, I'm going to remain hidden here within my layers, all of my final geos. So that is the shared bits of costume, costume 1 and costume 2. So I'm only visually looking at my rig, and I'm looking at the avatar. The first thing that we want to do is that we're going to want to make sure that we are in the right tool set here inside of Maya in order to be able to do this. So I'm going to head up to my modeling tools. I'm going to use the drop down here to select the rigging category. And I'm also going to change the shelf over. I'm going to get out of poly modeling. And I'm using a plugin here to help me a little bit with my weight painting. There's a couple of things that this plugin does that are really, really nice when you're weight painting geometry that Maya doesn't do out of the gate. And I'll kind of illustrate those when I get there. But this is called NG Skin Tools. It is a free plugin, and it's one that I highly recommend just because of some of the things that it can do. It'll be a little bit easier on us when we weight paint with this. Now, I will still be using Maya's weight painting because there are also things that are beneficial about that are not present in the current release of NG Skin Tools, and so I will bounce back and forth. That's mainly going to be something that I do just to see what it is that I'm doing. Okay, the next step here is going to be the binding process. So we have a skeleton and we have geometry. We need to bind those two things together. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open up my my hierarchy here for my skeleton, and I'm going to grab the first bone in the hierarchy here. You can see the root is just a group; it's not a bone or a joint. So I'm going to grab the first one. That's the pelvis, and then I'm going to grab her skin as well, or the geometry here. Next, we're going to go to skin, and we're going to go to bind skin options. We're going to go make sure that this is set up correctly here. I'm going to go to just reset the tool settings. And let's go take a look at what we've got in here. So bind to a joint hierarchy. That is our collection of bones that we want. So that is going to be correct. The bind method, okay, so the way that this works, right now the default is on closest distance. So for each vertex on the mesh, it's going to find the closest joint to that bone. This works okay, but what you're going to find happening is that there's going to be a little bit of weirdness when you get into the torso here, and that's because all of the vertices along the side of the rib cage here, along the side of the body, are actually closer to her upper arm joint than they are to the spinal column. So in order to fix that, we're going to change this. We're not going to use closest distance or closest in hierarchy. We're not going to use heat map. We're going to use geodesic voxel. So the geodesic voxel is a much closer approximation of the shape here, which is going to give us a much cleaner bake. It's still not going to be perfect, but it'll get to the point that it is doing what we want. I'm going to make sure that the normalization is done interactively. I'm going to make sure that the weight distribution is done by distance. And I'm going to turn off allow multiple bind poses. I really only need the one bind pose. And then this one becomes important as well. So this is the max influences. What this number determines is how many joints or bones have the ability to manipulate every single one of the vertices. So for instance, if we take the vertex right in her belly button right here, how many joints get to manipulate that? Well, the default here is set to 5, which means it would probably be the pelvis, this moment or this section of her spine, and then maybe even some of these joints coming out here that are going to manipulate her sash and her skirt. So we have a maximum of 5. That means that no vertex can be manipulated by more than 5 joints. Now, this is where skeletons can become rather expensive. So when you're creating a weight painting or a skin binding on your mesh, if you do not set this correctly for the engine which you are working, the engine will actually truncate this. So for instance, some engines have a limit of 4. So only 4 joints can manipulate every single vertex. So if you leave this at 5, whatever the smallest weight is actually going to get pruned from your rig when you bring it in. You got to be careful when you do this, especially depending on which software you find yourself creating this weight painting, because softwares like 3ds Max have a default of 20. And so you definitely want to keep a hold on that. I'm going to leave 5 here as my default. I probably don't need anything more than that. Not with the limited number of joints that I have here. If you ended up with a lot of twist joints and a lot of corrective joints in your rig, you may want to bring this up in order to be able to have all of those joints manipulate your skeleton. Now that I'm done, I'm going to just hit apply, and the system will take a moment here to process the information. And then we're going to get some visual feedback that this is actually completed. I'm going to go and close the bind skin window. And the first thing that we're going to see is that our rig has been changed in color. So no longer is it this dark navy blue. You can now see that it is kind of rainbow colored. So we are getting, an orange joint in her pelvis here, which goes up and becomes yellow, green, and then into blues and purples all the way up her spine. So this is Maya's indication that these joints are weighted to geometry, or that the geometry rather is weighted to the joints. This is so that we can actually see that weighting information is there. So if I were to go and grab one of her joints, say like this one here, this is her upper arm and I were to go move it, you'll see that there actually is some weighting information here. It has gone in and done one of the things that it was supposed to do. We'll also see here too that even though we use geodesic voxel, it is not perfect. You can see that a chunk of her underarm here, her lower body, has actually moved out with that region. Another tool we're going to want to get used to here while we're doing this is this little icon right here, X-ray joints. What this does is it gives us the ability to see the joints through the geometry. So if you're not seeing your joints on top, that's one of the things that we can do. And it makes it a little bit easier to be able to go and select a joint when we want to move it and see that it's actually having an effect on our model. This can also be changed if we go into the show and joints here. We can actually turn off the joints altogether. That way we only see our geometry, even if the joint layer is visible. And so those two things I typically will be playing with here as I go and weight paint this. So we've got our skeleton, we've got our geometry, and it is now bound to the skeleton. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go in and start doing some weighting. So we want to start painting on the model to make it so that things like that little bit of her torso moving with her arm don't happen. We want to make sure that she is moving in exactly the way that we both expect and want. So I'm going to start at the rootmost area of her body, hierarchically, the parentmost region, and I'm going to kind of work my way out from there. So the root joint, which is down at the bottom here, this is the one that controls the entirety of the character, has no weighting to it. I don't want anything to be bound to that. I then have her pelvis. Now this is going to look like a similar rotation here. And that's because the pelvis is not free floating at this point in time. But this is how that joint would move. And then we have, once we move up from there, the joints that start making up her spine and the areas of her body there. So the idea is to go in and start weight painting these so that we can get to something that is going to have the shape that we want it to have. To begin with, I'm going to select the geometry. Since we are weight painting our vertices, the vertices belong in the geometry. So weight painting happens when you have the geo selected. I'm going to go into my NG Skin Tools here, and I'm going to initialize the plugin by just clicking the button, and we'll see it pop open here like this. I'm going to go and make it a little bit larger, and I like to have it over here on this side of the screen like this. You're going to see that I'm using the evaluation non-commercial license version of this. This is because I typically don't do any rigging for projects that are being released. I typically only do modeling and hand this off to a rigger / animator to do that kind of stuff. But when I want to get my own stuff done, that's when I use this. So I'm going to initialize skinning layers. I have my geometry selected, so when I turn this on, it's going to go and perpetuate the list here, it's going to populate the list rather, with my mesh, and then the list of vertices that are currently being controlled by that mesh. So that is going to give me a pretty easy time here in going in and starting to weight paint things. So if we were to go in now and hit the paint button, we're going to see this myriad of colors appear on our model. These are indicative of all the joints and where the joints are connected to the surface. So for every joint, there is a different color, and we can kind of see those being blended together. Now, this is a little hard to see, a little hard to kind of realize what it is that you're looking at. So we can go into the display settings here, and we can actually go and change this. This is current influence grayscale. So if I were to grab her pelvis here, you're going to see that the pelvis lights up white, and then things that are not directly related to that joint are now lit up in black. And if I go and change this to colored, we will see the heat ramp version of this. So this is red, indicating that there is a lot of control by that single joint. And black means no control. And then the gradient you get between them, actually, we're not seeing 100% here. 100% is actually white. So we get 100% at white, 0% at black, and then everything in between is this gradient. So this is typically the view that I want to have while I'm weight painting. I don't mind using the grayscale version of this, but the problem that I have with the grayscale version is that I'm not very well able to see the difference between gray values. So being able to pick out how close to 100% this bright spot is, and where exactly 0% hits. It's a little bit foggier for me to see that. Human eye can't really detect that many variants of gray. And so I typically would like to use a heat map or a color map when I do this. It's going to make our lives a little bit simpler. Now, what we are manipulating when we weight paint is how the vertices follow the bones or the joints. And right now, the joints aren't going anywhere. So we can't see any of the following that we want to have happen. So I'm going to turn off the paint here in the plugin. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a very quick and temporary animation on the character so that we can actually see how the joints would manipulate and follow. Now, I don't want to do anything crazy and make the character bend in a way that isn't humanly possible. I want to try and maintain a level of realism here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into her skeleton here, and I'm going to grab all three spine joints. So spine 1, spine 2, and spine 3. And I'm going to go to the first frame in the animation. You can see that my rig here actually has some animation on it already. So let's go and clean that up. So this is something that was done from a previous version of weight painting here. So I'm going to go and just remove these keys. And then what we'll do is we'll reset some keys here so that we can actually see the animation as it moves. So there. Okay, so let's go back and grab the spine. There's spine 1. And we'll find somewhere in here. Well, that's bizarre. The rig has reparented itself. Let me undo to go back before I was... There we go. Something I had done here had this up here. Something I'd done had reparented the joints, which is not something we want to do here. Once your skeleton is made, you don't want to do that. So I'll try and do this a little bit with purpose here. I believe what had happened was that I had done I'd done something with my shift key that inadvertently kind of reparented things when I was just looking to open the hierarchy up here. So there we go. No animation. We're good. The parenting is still the way that it was originally. So spine 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So those are my 3 spine joints. Those are the ones that I'm going to want to make her move. So we're going to go to the first frame. I'm going to hit S to set a key. And then I'm going to move up a certain number of frames here. Let's go to frame 20. And I'm going to bend her forward. Now you can see that because of the way that the orientation in these joints is set up, they're not all rotating the right way. So we're going to grab the lower body here, spine 1, and move it forward. I'll hit S to snap that key. We'll grab the next joint in the hierarchy, spine 2, and we'll bend her forward again there. We'll hit our bind key as well, and then we'll grab the last joint in the hierarchy and bend that forward. This one I don't want to bend quite nearly as much because it's situated in the middle of her rib cage, a place where she doesn't actually bend all that much. So there we have some bending motion. I'm then going to go up a few more frames. We'll go to frame 30. Let me go and grab all 3 joints again, and I'm going to go and copy the frame. And at frame 30, we'll go and paste to get her back to her initial position. And then we'll move up a few frames again, and let's do a little bit of side-to-side rotation. So the idea is that we want to move her sideways. So I will again start with her spine 1. We'll go and turn the avatar onto a reference layer here so we can't edit it. There's spine 2 and spine 3. So again, we'll go and ensure that there is a key on these things. That's a pretty extreme motion that she's got there, but that's kind of what I'm after. I want to make sure that I can get to a point where I think maybe something like that is probably as extreme as she would ever be able to get. I'm seeing that we're not losing any volume in her hip here, which is kind of what we're interested in here too. She's not really collapsing down, which is nice. Okay. So yeah, so that's going to be okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and start weight painting on these joints. So I'm going to go and select her mesh again. We'll get off the reference layer here now so that we can select it. We're back into NG skin tools, and I'm going to turn on the painting option. And the first thing that I'm going to want to do is go in and set this pelvis up a little bit more. So when I look at this now, I can see that the pelvis is not manipulating any of the underside of her torso. Her bottom as well is not being controlled by this. This is because of the number of joints that I've got here that I meant to control her skirt and her flowy clothing. I actually don't want those in this weight at all, or in this weight painting at all. And so it would be nice to go in and kind of remove those joints so that they're not really manipulating anything here. So if I go down, I'm just scrolling through the list of joints here. There's her fingers. There's a bunch of nubs in here too that we're not going to want either. So these are the first two that we can get rid of. These are collar joints. Now this is not collarbone. This is not her clavicle. These are collar joints, and these are the ones that are going to move the collar of her jacket. And so I'm going to go into scale. Let's put this back at frame 1 here. And I'm going to scale this. I'm going to bring my intensity down to something like 0.1 or even smaller. And then I'm going to hold B, and I'm going to middle or left mouse button drag to make my brush bigger. And I'm just going to scale this down until that's all gone. So what this is doing is it's multiplying whatever the value is by whatever my intensity is. So 0.061 means that we're shrinking that value down. So that one looks good. We can do the same thing with this one. Just get rid of any influence of those joints that are meant to be part of her costume. This one is fine. It's clavicle, upper arm, lower arm. We also have these nubs in here. So again, these are things that I add to my rig that kind of act as the end joint. None of the nubs are going to need anything as well. So all of that can be painted out as well. I'm not really going to worry about those because they'll fix themselves when I weight paint the fingers. We'll scroll down, twist. There's the skirts. Okay, so there's skirt rear left 01. And again, I'm just going to unpaint this so that its influence is gone. Here we have skirt side 01 left, and I will do the same thing. We'll remove any influence that joint has on the mesh. Okay, we'll go down to the next one. This is skirt side 2 left. And again, a little bit of scaling down. We'll remove this weighting. I don't see anything else. We'll do this one. We'll do this one. Now, I'm actually not worried too much about stuff on her right side. I'm just looking for where this stuff touches the center line. And that's because we're going to mirror this over. And so it's a little bit easier to just worry about one side than the other. This character is completely symmetrical, so I don't really worry about anything beyond that. Upper leg twist, foot, upper leg, foot, lower leg. Good. So that looks like all of that has been removed. So I'm going to head to the mirror side, the mirror tool here, and we're going to mirror this. So if I look at my little gizmo, her left is the positive side. So if we go and point her like this left side is positive and this left side is negative. That's all based off the gizmo here. Positive X points left. So that means when you start counting an X, it goes 0, 1, 2, 3. And then when you go to this side, it's going to go 0, -1, -2, -3. So positive is on her left and negative is on her right. So when I mirror, because the left side is the one that I've gone and painted, I want to go positive to negative. So I'm just going to hit mirror. And we should see all of those joints get unpainted on the other side. So that makes it a little bit easier. Now, if I go back into the model here, we'll see that there's still a little unwanted weighting on some of these joints here. So if I go and scroll down through the list, we can see if anything else is weighting that part of her body that shouldn't be there. I was just going through all of her fingers. And all of her fingers in the other hand. It doesn't look, what was that? Skirt rear. So there's a little bit of skirt there that I'm going to get rid of. A little bit of skirt there I can get rid of. upper leg twist, lower leg. Okay, so we're in a good place. So let's go to her pelvis now and try and paint in a little bit of a better shape for the pelvis. I'm going to go back to my paint tab. I'm going to get out of scale and I'm going to go to either replace or add. I think I'll use add. And I'm going to add a value, something like 0.5, somewhere in that range. And I'm definitely going to want to scale my brush down. Actually, the memory of this system here, each different brush mode has its own scale that it remembers. So my add is a lot smaller, if you can see the size of that. My scale is a lot bigger, so that's good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and click and add a little bit of color. Now, because I'm adding 0.5 and the value here appears to already be above 0.5, it means that we're getting into white, which again is the color of 100%. And so I'm going to go and run this up her body here. Again, I'm only worrying about the one side of her body. I'm not worrying about the other. And I'm just kind of painting in what would be, if you were to consider this an action figure, where that pelvis of the action figure would be, that stiff plastic component that we know would act as the character's body. So that's what I'm going to go and paint here. We'll go to mirror and we'll mirror this over so that it does a perfectly symmetrical version of this. And there, we've now got our starting point for the pelvis. I'm going to go up to the spine and I can see a couple of things here. There's a couple of vertices here. Let's turn our joint display off. So I can see a couple of little blue splotches here, which is fine. We can go and manipulate that as well. I'll go into scale and we'll just unpaint those. But I'm going to go back to my add here and I'm going to start adding essentially a stripe of white around that region of her body where she's going to bend. So just in and around there. So it looks like I've got this going about 3 rows of vertices here, or polygons up in that region. We'll go back to the pelvis here and I'm going to make sure that I keep that. So I've got this. You can see now it's either white or it's black. So it's 100% or 0%. Spine 1, okay, that's going to be here. If we go and look at where that joint is, spine 1 should actually go from that part of her body up to the bottom of the thoracic arch, or the bottom of her rib cage. And so I'm going to paint in all the way up into that region here with white, which is going to fill that in. Now, the nice thing about this is that these are normalized values. And what that means is that they cannot go above 100%. This is a 0 to 1 range, 1 being 100% and 0 being 0%. So when I paint something completely white, 100%, it's not going to have any color on any other joint. It's not allowed to because it's normalized. The vertices can't go above 100%. I'll go into the next spine joint. This is meant to be her rib cage. And so I will go and paint in all of the vertices here that are meant to be controlled by her rib cage. Now, I do have a second joint inside her rib cage. This is spine 3 that I am going to want to tweak a little bit. Again, your rib cage typically doesn't have that much ability to bend when you move. There's a little bit of twisting that happens in there, but you're not going to get the full range of motion that you have in your lumbar or in your cervical vertebrae. They typically move a lot more than what you get anywhere else. So again, I'm just fully painting this in here. Now, this is completely undoing what was present in the geodesic voxel. So you might be wondering, well, what's the point of doing the geodesic voxel? And the point of that is that it gives you kind of a better starting point. So that problem I had with her underarm now pulling on her body, again, I've painted that out, right? I've now got all the way up under her arm here, all completely connected to her spine. And so I'll run up to about here, and then we'll go into spine 3, and I'll start spine 3 off to take up that next kind of region here and go up to about where her neck is going to be. And again, I'm going to paint a little bit more than I actually want, and that's because it overlaps the other bits of weight painting, and it's going to ensure that we don't end up with any kind of rogue coloring anywhere from vertices that we don't want to have selected. And again, I want to make sure that I'm bringing this at least to the center line. That way, when I mirror it, it will do a good job of getting mirrored. So it doesn't matter what I paint on her other side, just as long as I get it as mirrored centered as I can. So I'll bring this down here and we'll go across her torso here. So let's go into mirror and we'll mirror these things. And I can see, so something has missed on one of her spine areas here. So it looks like spine 2 did not get enough on that side. So I'm going to hit mirror again. And you can see there's still something going off. The mirroring is not perfect here. So we'll get it kind of as close as we can. And this could be anything. It could be any number of joints in her arm, up in her neck, in her head, or whatever. I'm not worried about those right now. The only thing that I'm really concerned about is her body. Now, when I move this, it's actually going to be a lot jankier than it was before, and that's because we're now getting movement yes at 100% or movement no at 0%. So we've lost any kind of smoothing between these regions. But that is exactly what the next tool is going to be for. So I'm going to go into paint and I'm going to get out of add and I'm going to go into smooth. Now, smooth is one of the reasons why I like using the NG skin tools. There is a property here in the smooth brush that is not present in Maya's default weight painting tools. And that is this, brush iterations. So what this does is if I were to set this intensity to 1, this brush iterations is a multiplier against that 1. So for instance, setting my brush iterations to 5 is now 1 5 times, which means it's now got a value of 5. So it's a way of being able to get really, really, really strong results without having paint over the same region several times. So I'm going to hold B and left mouse click here again to get my brush to be a fair bit larger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint out in this region using the smooth to try and get these vertices to relax on themselves a little bit. And we should start seeing this really nice gradient of colors kind of reach in again in the way that they were. I'm going to go to spine 1 and I'm going to do a little bit of spine 1 blending in the same region here. And indeed, you can see that instead of that weird stretching, we're now getting a really nice set of smooth vertices here in the way that this stuff is moving. So I've got spine 1 selected here, and I'm going to do the same thing above. I'm going to go and start painting into where the rib cage is. And under her torso here. So I'm going to undo the animation. I'm going to twist it back. And that's so that I can paint in this region here without actually interfering with what was there. Now, as I paint this, you actually see a lot of the colors kind of dissipate. You can see that the reds are mostly gone. And I'm now getting kind of even the yellows disappearing in this region. So if I go to pelvis, we'll see that we're getting a really nice blend all the way up, a nice blend all the way across. And then here, we're getting a really nice blend as well. This is spine 3. So I'm just going to make sure, again, that I'm blending this at least to the center line here. There's spine 3 there, which I'll go and blend out across the top of her body here. And I'll bring this out across her chest as well. I'm going to go into spine 2 here, and we're going to smooth this out even further. Now, when I was doing this, I was actually smoothing the opposing side. So instead of doing her left side, I was now doing her right. And this is something I want to be fully aware of, because what that means is that if I go and do my mirror now and I do positive to negative, I'm going to be undoing the smoothing that I've done, which is not what I want to do. I want to try and keep this fairly nice and clean here. So there's my pelvis. That's not too bad. Let's go and do the mirroring here. I think I'm going to smooth a little bit more the front here before I do this. Try and bring some of that color back up in the middle. So let's go to mirror. And I'm going to switch this now from positive to negative to positive, and I'll mirror. And that's just going to make sure that we get a nice clean transition. Now this often will create a little bit of an artifact along the center line where the vertices meet. So often you'll see just a little bit of distortion there. So I'll try and go through and make sure that that's okay. It looks pretty decent here on each of these. So let's go and look at the animation again here as she bends. And I'm actually seeing like a really nice smooth curvature to her body as she bends. Now, the place that I want to make sure that I'm not screwing this up, again, we saw this really nicely at the beginning, was that region of her pelvis up here. You can see now, this is her top of her pelvis up here, this little bump that sticks out. Well, when she leans sideways over to the side, her pelvis shouldn't curve in like that. So what that means is I've got to bring a little bit more pelvis up in that region. We can in fact see here that the pelvis has been brought down, and we've got spine 1, spine 2, and no spine 3. So that's good. But spine 1 and spine 2 are affecting that region. So in the paint section, I'm going to go to add, and we're just going to bring this down a little bit. I don't need to add all that much, but the idea is that I want to paint back in where that region of her pelvis is supposed to be. So just a little bit of painting like this. And then I'll go into the smooth. I'm going to bring my iterations down to 2 here. And we're going to go and bring the brush size down a little bit. And again, I just want to kind of smooth that region out so that it's not so overpowering. And I can see that bump on her pelvis now retaining its shape. So she's not actually manipulating her pelvis in such a major way. I'm going to go in with the scale here, and I'm actually going to pull down a little bit of spine 1 before going in and smoothing. I just don't want to have any spine 1 that jumps a gap. I don't want to have spine and then black and then more spine. So making sure that it's all kind of contained in one area in this way. Okay, spine 2, same thing here. I'm going to go into the scale, and we're just going to pull spine 2 out of that region a little bit. And go back into smooth. Bring the smooth up. We're going to bring our iterations right down to 1 so that we're going really lightly on the smooth here. But there, something like that. So there, I can see that her pelvis is actually holding its shape here now as she moves. So that's lovely. That's kind of what I'm after. I want to make sure that all of this stuff is as clean as possible when we get these shapes going. And that appears to be doing just that. Once I'm happy with the manipulations that I'm getting here in terms of the spine and in terms of getting this stuff to go, the next step is just to go and get rid of that range of motion that we went and added. So I'm going to go in and select, again, spine 1, 2, and 3. Those are the joints that I went and created the animation on. And I'll start at the end, and I'm going to go and delete, 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 and delete. So all the keyframes are gone. There's now no animation here, and I'm free to move on to the next area. So I can start doing her clavicle and her upper arm. I can add the weighting of her breast into that area. I can go and start doing her legs, and I would move on. And essentially, that's how I do this. I move out from this central node along each of the hierarchical limbs as they were, adding the weight painting and going and moving all the way along. Now, not to bore you with all of the process of doing that, let's go take a look at this process that we can use now to go and add this weight painting that we've done to this avatar now to one of our more completed character costumes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the avatar. I'm then going to bring out, let's do costume 2. And so I'll bring out costume 2 and the shared geometry. And then I'm also going to hide the joints. This is just going to make it easier to select all of my geo. Now I'm going to add the hierarchical parentmost joint, and I'm going to go to skin, bind skin, and we are going to bind this in exactly the same way, geodesic voxel using the joint hierarchy. And so I'll hit apply and close. Now what this will have done is it will have redone that geodesic voxel weight painting now on this new set of geometry. So that means that if I were to unhide the avatar, the joint movement that we would get would actually move both meshes. So this is going to move both this costume and the avatar. the avatar are both moving in the same way. You can see that I've actually got a little bit of issue here with one of her hands in the avatar. Something is wonky there. It looks like symmetry has not been kind to me. But I'm going to undo this. There we have it. And we can actually go and hide the joint layer now. So the idea is that we now want to copy the weighting information. Actually, if we bring the joint layer back here and we go and look at, let's go to object mode. We go and look at one of her joints here moving. Let's grab her spine. We're going to see that the costume here doesn't do a good job, right? We get all kinds of folding over itself and kind of ugly, wonky shaping at the back. And again, this is just due primarily to the fact that there are a lot of meshes that make up this part of her body. So as she moves, you can see that things kind of go through each other and they don't move in a very clean, nice way. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and copy the weighting from the avatar mesh, which we've gone and cleaned up at least in the torso. And then we're going to go and paste that weighting information onto the rest of the geometry. So to begin, the area that we're interested in is to go and copy vertex weights. And then we're going to go and paint those weights onto another mesh. So the idea here is to go and copy what is the avatar. So let's make sure we have that avatar selected. There she is there. So skin, copy skin weights. Component, selected element is not a skinned mesh vertex. Let's go to, is that not the right one that I want? Oh, substitute geometry. Pardon me. No, that's not what I want. Let's go take a look at the settings here in substitute geometry. No, that's not the right one. Skin. Find skin. Copy skin weights. Move skin joints. Move weight to influences. Bake deformations to, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's, okay, let's copy, let's do this. I've got my mesh selected here. Let's go to vertex and let's try that again. Vertex. Let's hide the joints. Vertex, there we go. Okay, so we're going to go to skin, and we are going to go and copy the vertex weights. Oh, it only wants to do one at a time. Okay, yeah, this is definitely not the right option here. Now let's go back to object mode. And let's see if this is the right one here. Copy skin weights. Yeah, okay. I've got it. There's two copies in here. That's why things are going wrong. So it's copy skin weights that I want. So what I'm going to do, we're going to bring out her second costume. And the idea is to select the original weighted mesh. This is the avatar. And then shift select another mesh. Skin, copy skin weights, and that will transfer the weighting information from the old to the new. So now I'll remove the jacket, I'll add her scarf, and we'll skin, copy skin weights. I'll remove the scarf and add the belt, and skin, copy skin weights. And then we'll go and, again, grab the avatar, shift-click the waistcoat, and we can skin, copy skin weights. So what this should have done now is copied those weighting informations from one mesh to the other. So you can see as she bends now, we're not getting all of that geometry bent over itself in the same way that we had before. Now it's maintaining a much cleaner shape as we rotate these joints. So if I go and grab her spine one here and I move her, you can see that it's now, much like it was doing in the avatar, holding its shape a little bit better. Now, it's not to say that it's perfect. And again, you are going to need a little bit of cleanup when you do this. If I move her forward here, I can see that there's a little bit of of crumpling in the scarf here. If I go and look at this, it's probably not what I would want, but that's no big deal. I'm going to open the NG Skin Tools, and I will initialize the skinning for just her sash here. And then we can go in, let's go into Paint, and let's go and find her spines and see where that weighting issue is coming from. So obviously there's something right here that is a little bit crooked in terms of the way that it's being blended. So the pelvis, spine 1, spine 2, spine 3, and I just want to make sure that nothing else. So here we can see that there's a lot of clavicle affecting this down here. So that's something that's going to get removed, at least from the lower portions. We've got our upper arms, which again, I can remove from all of the lower portions here. That shouldn't have anything to do with anything. The upper arm twist, her breasts, the nubs from her breast, that's fine. Breast, her collar, all of these gray ones here are not having an effect on anything, which is good. And so we can go down, make sure that the skirt isn't affecting these. Now, again, they are going to need skirt information for sure. And it looks okay. So let's go back up now to where the spine region is. I'm going to go to the smooth brush. And again, I'm quite small in the smooth brush here. So I'm just going to go and soften this up a little bit where this transition is. Where again, something, I'm not entirely sure what, but something in the way that this was blending together wasn't quite as smooth as it could have been. And so by just going in and doing a little bit of painting in that region, same thing is true with the pelvis here and spine 2. I just want to make sure that I'm not getting any kind of weird shapes. And it appears now that that's actually going to hold its shape quite well. Now, each and every mesh, I'll turn off paint and I'll go back to my selection here. Each and every mesh is going to need the initialization of its skinning layers. This is what helps it do what it's doing. And so it means that I'll have to go through and double check that each one of these things here kind of on its own is doing what it's supposed to do. But I can see that she's actually got a fair decent animation now, or bend in this chunk of her clothing. That would do exactly what I want it to do. And I don't need to do anything further once this skinning data has been transferred. That's really it. I'm now at a point where I'm free to kind of move on and move into other regions of the character. Now, if you get to this point here, so let me go and open the skin tools again. I'm going to turn off paint. So I've gone and rotated her spine, and you can see that I did not set a keyframe here, so it's not an animation. There's a really easy fix for this, and that's just to go to skin and go to bind pose, and that'll reset the joints back to the position they were in when you attached the skin to your model. And so that's really all there is to it. It's a matter of just stepping through the entire mesh, doing all of these things. Again, I would fully weight paint my simplistic or avatar mesh before going in and copying the data. Here I did it just on her spine and then copied it to her clothing, right? I'm doing that because I'm not going to go and weight paint the entire character in this video. I would properly do that. Paint this entire character from head to toe all the way down to the tips of each fingers. Then I would transfer the data to the new skin, the new costume, and then I can go and move on to costume number 2. And that would be all there is to do. Once that's done and you're pleased with this, you would save your file. I would then go and delete the avatar. That's no longer going to be a necessary part of the solution here. And we could save our file, and we're now going to have the skeleton, both costumes here in one file. All weighted, all put together, and all ready to go. So I hope that's been helpful. Now that this is done here, we could actually bring this into Unreal, and we can add some animations to it via the characters that exist in the engine. But I hope this has gotten you to a point here where you can actually start weight painting your models and get them to a point where you can get them into the engine. Until next time, we'll talk soon.